Teresa Corbyn is from the Communications Consumer Group, ACAN. You're talking about a lot of the people you work with. In fact, your own site has been taken down. Can you just describe what the impact has been for a lot of people with Facebook pages that are not news today?
So thousands of charities, not-for-profits, small businesses, Indigenous communities, groups that push out warnings about fires and floods have all been affected today. And this doesn't just affect the news sites, it affects all of us. So people can't get the information, and Facebook has become a gatekeeper and they have too much control.
The Minister says it's Facebook's fault. Do you agree?
I think Facebook could have given us a lot more warning than they have. They certainly haven't given us any guarantees about bringing the information back, and we really need it. Otherwise, what's going to happen now is that I think this could end up being like Cambridge Analytica being a storm in a teacup. This is going to be worse because so many groups only use Facebook as their website presence. They don't know how to set up their own websites and they don't have the money to do that. So I think that the impact is massive, and Facebook needs to really think about the impact not just on those businesses now, but also on Facebook long term.
Georgia Wild, when you woke up this morning, how did you react?
I was a bit shocked. As like a previous student editor, I was surprised that student publications at universities were kind of roped into this, especially because they have a kind of a smaller like readership, and also independent, small media organisations targeted at youth. And I think those platforms use Facebook because it's widely used and it's easily to disseminate like very digestible content for young people, and it's also easy to facilitate conversation and comments. And so I was just kind of taken aback that that opportunity was taken away from those platforms which really rely on it.
So what's your question for the panel?
My question is, how will small publications with little budget, who often represent marginalised voices, be able to survive these restrictions, and what will the government do to ensure that they will be as protected as major media corporations?
All right, I'm going to put that to Hal Crawford first.
Yeah, let me have a go at that one. Because, Georgia, I think you've nailed it. I think that Facebook, the move by Facebook is going to devastate a lot of small publishers, and disproportionately the small guys and the young guys and the online guys. And the big guys are going to be okay, but some of these people, as you would know, get up to 80–90% of their traffic straight from Facebook. So they're gone overnight. And I know from talking to people in the industry that this is going to cost jobs, quite a lot of jobs.
Where will those jobs be?
Well, if you get 90% of your traffic and you're a news producer and you get revenue from that traffic and it goes overnight, that's a big problem. Now, pretty much the only good thing that I think is in the code that Paul obviously champions, and just about everyone else does too, but about the only good thing is the advance warning of algorithm change. So, sorry, I don't want to get too into the detail, but I don't think that the code is a good thing. Facebook did sort of telegraph ahead of time that they were going to do this. Rod Sims, the ACCC chief, said it was brinkmanship, and I think that they proved that they were willing to, they proved they were willing to go beyond that brink, didn't they?
I would say, as someone who was in the tech industry for 22 years, it was a pretty clumsy misfire. I mean, they let Google take all the body blows and the shrapnel, and then they went with the nuclear option without any warning. They deployed, natural language processing systems that had glitches, and then you ended up with this over-blocking. So it shows how much market power that they have and what steps they're willing to take. You know, this isn't just about Australia to them. This is about precedent and the risk that it poses to them on a global scale if other governments follow suit.
You're someone that, in your role as eSafety Commissioner, has spent years trying to get these platforms to take content, take material off their platforms. They talk continuously about how impossible that is to do. How then can Facebook overnight switch off news and information for a whole country if they can't tackle abuse imagery on their site?
Well, precisely. They can target advertising with deadly precision. They should be able to target child sexual abuse material, racism, online hate, all of these things. It's really a matter of priorities and corporate will, which is why we've pushing them so hard around safety by design. Safety is considered a cost center or an afterthought.
And an important point here, Hamish, is that when we set up the eSafety Commission, we legislated to do that in 2014. The companies all said, no, this isn't necessary. It's inappropriate interference with our business. So these kinds of threats are not new. We stuck to our guns, and we now have a world-leading safety regulator, online safety regulator.
Michelle Rowland.
Can I jump in, Hamish, on this?
Sure.
In terms of just in terms of your point about, why the companies haven't been more forceful in terms of getting disinformation off of their sites and other harmful content. I think one of the key reasons is that it goes to their logic and to their profit motive, and that type of content drives user engagement. We've seen that disinformation on those sites drives user engagement. We've seen posts that solicit, primal emotions like fear and hate drive user engagement. So that's a key part of the reason why they haven't had the will to tackle some of the disinformation, hate speech, and all sorts of other things on their platforms until it became too much of a reputational issue for them. I do just want to jump in very quickly about something a bit more fundamental, that a lot of the questions that have been asked so far by the audience gets to the fact that it's the users who are impacted by this. But let's not fool ourselves. The decisions that were made around the commercial code that Facebook made, that government made, that media made, were not based on the user and their needs. They were based on the commercial interests of the tech companies and the commercial interests of major media news organizations. And the user has been completely caught off guard and in the middle.
That's true, isn't it, Michelle Rowland? Labor supported all of this, but the collateral are the Australian consumers.
We absolutely have always supported the principle that the ACCC outlined in terms of news media outlets being able to monetise their content, which the platforms have been enjoying for free for decades now. And that level of disruption really is what has led to such substantial contractions in the Australian media market. It's seen jobs go, it's seen the traditional advertising and subscription models turned on their heads. But I would say two things. The first is this last couple of hours, I think, has caused a lot of people to reflect on what Facebook is. It started off as this networking portal that you could share information with one another, you could share photos, and I don't think it was conceived at the time that this would become one of the primary vehicles through which some 40% of Australians would access their news. So it has morphed into that, but I think the other point to note is, has Facebook made its product completely uncompelling? Because it is a blanket ban on news. It means that no news at all can be shared, and it also means that so many other sites have been impacted. So we've seen different search engines come and go over the years. Once upon a time, we all had Internet Explorer, we all had MySpace. So I think it really has called into question, is this the beginning of the end of Facebook?
But if this is a contest between the power of the sovereign state versus the tech giant, hasn't Facebook just thumbed its nose at Australia?
It's thumbed its nose, but I don't think that this is the end of the story yet. The point is that, as Rod Sims outlined, the reason why Facebook is able to act in this way is because it enjoys substantial market power and has just reinforced that. That is the whole reason why regulation needed to be devised in order to ensure that that market power was kept in check.
But
now, we would hope
Paul Fletcher's bluff.
Well, can I just pick up on the point that Michelle made? If you go back 25 years ago, the expectation was that the internet would be lots of small sites, very disaggregated, lots of diversity. But in fact, it's ended up being a small number of very large businesses, and that does raise very serious market power issues, as Michelle rightly says. And these are issues
But it didn't end up that way. I'm sorry to interrupt. It didn't end up that way just out of inevitability. It ended up that way because it was not regulated. We've gotten ourselves into a position where we have let a major commercial company that's driven by profit motive essentially be responsible for a huge part of our information infrastructure. This was not by accident. This is something that was caused by lack of regulation, and it's incumbent upon us as citizens in a democracy and our elected representatives to have done something about this and to let us think creatively now. I mean, I think this is really a key moment for us. I'm sorry to hear about the disruption for everybody, but at the same time, this has energized me to think that we can now come up with some creative solutions, perhaps around a public infrastructure,
Can I interrupt, Lydia? Because I've got a question for Lydia.
If I can just finish the point I was making and acknowledge what Lydia said there. So I think governments around the world have been working through the implications of this, and to pick up your point about sovereignty, it is not acceptable to the government of Australia or any other sovereign nation that giant global corporations are controlling the information that comes to our citizens. Traditional media is exposed to regulation in terms of content and other things, and we've been working to put in place similar regulation, including safety regulation.
But hang on, you've just cut off millions of your citizens to access.
Well, let's be very clear.
And regulation is different from a code that is supposed to regulate competition. Regulation, I think, of Facebook is a great idea. The thing I wanted to ask Lydia was, is she a supporter of the code or not, the code as it stands? I couldn't pick it up from what you were saying, Lydia.
Well, I've admitted that I don't have a lot of expertise on the actual code of itself, but I think with the media code, it's a sideshow, I think, to a bigger issue. The bigger issue is that these major companies have gained way too much power, and the media code is one very small part of dealing with that. There's more fundamental issues that we need to address here in terms of how we access information, who we let be the gatekeepers of that. Our access to information is a public good, and we have put it in the hands of commercial entities with very little regulation up until now. I think right now we're dealing with a reckoning around regulation and the actions of these companies. But there were many years before there where we were just caught up in the novelty of it all and didn't properly address these issues.
And can I just pick up on that point that Lydia has made, because it's a really powerful one. Going back 5 or 10 years ago, indeed when we were working on establishing the eSafety Commissioner, when the Australian government was talking about regulating the platforms, the message we got back was, oh no, you can't do that, you'll be a technological backwater. And that argument was widely accepted even 10 years ago. I think community attitudes have evolved quite sharply, and I think I'm very confident in saying what Facebook has done today will further cause an evolution of community attitudes.